After going through this video, you will be able to explain the importance of JavaScript, the execution of a JavaScript file, how we can use a JavaScript file inside an HTML file. So far, we have covered these 5 milestones with great ease and learning. Before we start this module and experience the exciting journey that awaits us, first let us give ourselves a pat on the back for all the hard work and the learnings we have done and achieved so far. Proceeding further, in this video we will understand what JavaScript is, the need of this programming language, and how we can use it. We already know that programming language can either be a client-side scripting language or a server-side scripting language. And by scripting language, we mean that these languages can be executed directly without any pre-compilation, unlike in the case of C++ and Java. JavaScript is a client-side scripting language just like HTML, which means that the web server simply sends the JavaScript files to the browser as a response without even bothering to know what the file contains. We have already learned HTML and CSS, which are client-side scripting languages, in this training. So, what makes it important to learn this one? Let's find out. JavaScript is used to make interactive web pages. And by interactive, we mean it reacts to human actions. For example, when we shop on websites like Amazon, Flipkart or Myntra, whenever we hover our mouse over any product that we like, we see its enlarged image on the screen. This is because of JavaScript, which these websites use in their code. Using JavaScript, we are able to do these things because of two special features that JavaScript has. The first is it helps to capture various user actions on a web page, like clicking on a button, hovering the mouse over an image, or pressing any key on the keyboard. All these actions are saved as JavaScript events. Next, it gives us the flexibility to edit HTML elements of a web page after they have been loaded by the browser. That is, when we click on some element, the content of the element changes. Now, how we can edit the HTML elements, this we will cover as we progress in this module. So, both these features in combination enable us to create highly interactive web pages using JavaScript. Coming to the next segment of this video, we will see how we can use JavaScript files. As HTML, CSS, PHP files are saved as .html, .css and .php respectively, similarly, JavaScript files are also saved as .js. So let me save a new file and save it as script.js for future use. Also, we will store this and all the other JavaScript files inside the JS folder, which we have already created inside the project folder. Once we create a JS file, we can use them in our HTML code by adding this snippet. If you remember, in the second module, CSS, to use a CSS file, we added the link of that file inside the head tag of the HTML code. But for JavaScript, we add this code snippet inside the body tag like this. In this snippet, we have two attributes, type and src. The type attribute indicates that it is a JavaScript file. The src or source attribute tells us where the JavaScript file is present, that is the JS folder, and the name of the file, that is script.js. Now, why we add the snippet in the body tag, we will understand later in the training. Now, there is another way to use a JavaScript code in our HTML code. We simply add the code inside the script tags using the document.write function followed by the string which we want to print. Note that here we are not using any attributes. If we look at the output, we can see that using the document.write function, we have been able to print the string. This approach is something that we don't follow because we want to create a separate JS file, as it can be easily used in separate HTML files. Next, let us understand how JavaScript files are executed. We know that JavaScript files are added in the body tag of the HTML code. So, when the browser starts rendering the code, it encounters the script tag, which is basically for the JS file. This initiates a new HTTP request to fetch the associated JavaScript file. And once the JavaScript file is fetched and sent to the browser, it is then rendered by the browser. In short, JavaScript files are not fetched along with the HTML. They are fetched by the browser while rendering the code. With this, we come to the end of this video. Up next is a quiz. See you in the next topic. Hi, welcome back. In this video, you will see how to write and execute JavaScript code on your mobile. Open the SPCK application and go to the project section. This is something you have already done earlier while creating an HTML plus Bootstrap project. Select the project ES8 System.js. This will create a new project folder below your already existing HTML plus Bootstrap project. Inside this folder, you will see some default files. If you open the index.html file, you can see that inside the script tags, config.js is written. This means that whatever code you will write has to be written inside the config.js file. Note that I'm not going to delete any of these files and will enter my custom JS code inside these files only. If you want, you can delete these files and create your own folder structure. But this will lead to unnecessary complications and you will have to change the linking as well. So let us open the config.js file now. If it has any default code, we can choose to delete and write our own code from scratch. So let us write our first program to print hello world. First, let us define a variable ABC and assign hello world as its value. Now, to print this variable, we need to use document.write followed by the variable name inside the parenthesis and ending the statement with a semicolon. Let us run the code. Whoa, the code is executed successfully and you can see the output. Let us try one more code. This time, let's do some calculations. Let ABC equal to 2, ABC star star equal to 5. Document.write ABC. Here, we have used an exponential equal to operator. You can find more about this operator in the second topic of this module. What this operator does is that it multiplies the existing value of ABC by itself 5 times and then reassigns it with the new result. So, ABC would become 2 to the power 5, which is 32. So let us run the code and confirm the same. There you go. Our code is working absolutely fine. Now similarly, you can execute the remaining codes of the JavaScript module on your own. Also, as mentioned earlier in the previous module, to complete the assignment, you need to import the previously written HTML, CSS and PHP files, which you can do by selecting the import files option. Well, that was all in this video. Bye-bye. After going through this video, you will be able to define a variable using let and var, list down the differences between let and var, list down the various naming conventions followed while naming a variable. Welcome to the second topic of the JavaScript module. If you recall, you have already studied variables in PHP. So why are we studying it in this module again? Well, both PHP and JS are different programming languages. This is one obvious reason, right? But the way variables are defined in JavaScript are different from what we learned in PHP. Also, as JavaScript has undergone a major revision in 2015 called ES6, it has made the variable declaration more robust. So, keeping these above factors in mind, it is necessary to understand the concept of variables in JavaScript. Before we deep dive into this topic, there are a few things we must keep into consideration and should implement this in all the upcoming topics. In this topic, we will refer to a lot of HTML and JS code and will write them in the VS Code editor. All the code examples which we will discuss in this topic, please execute all of them on your own. The more you code, the better you will become as a developer. All the HTML and JS files which we will create, we will store inside the project folder. The HTML files can directly be stored inside the project folder, whereas the JS files will be stored inside the JS folder inside the project folder, which we have already created earlier in this training. Use proper extensions to save the HTML and JS files. And most importantly, don't forget to link the JS file from inside the HTML file using the script tag at the end of the body tag. Lastly, check the output of each file using local. So let's get started with variables in JavaScript now. When we talk about variables, the first step that comes to our mind is to how to define or declare a variable. We do that by using the let or var keyword. The let keyword has been newly introduced to JavaScript in 2015 with ES6 to make variable declaration more robust. Before that, we declared a variable using the var keyword, which still works but is less preferred. We will first understand how to declare a variable using the let keyword. To define a variable, say ABC, we add let before the name of the variable. Pretty simple, right? Once the variable is defined, we can then assign any data to this variable using an equal to operator. For now, let us add the data as hello world, our all-time favorite string value. Both these snippets can be combined into one single line like this. This is a shortcut way so that we don't have to write multiple lines to declare a variable and then assign a value. So, let us write this line in our script.js file. The data is now stored in the variable ABC and can be accessed anytime using the same name. So, now if we want to print hello world, we can use the document.write function and pass the variable name as its value. This will print hello world in the output. Again, I will remind you that here we have written the JavaScript code in a separate file script.js, and then we have linked this JavaScript file to the HTML file. Like PHP, JavaScript is also a loosely typed language. And by loosely we mean we don't need to specify the data type of the variable. Here, we have two separate codes in which the variable holds different types of data types. On the left, we have a string data type, and on the right, we have an int data type. In both these cases, we have not defined the data type of variable anywhere in the code. Also, if we change the data type of a variable, let's say for this code, the variable automatically gets converted into the correct type based on its value. Like here, first, the data type is an int data type, and later we replaced it with a string data type. The variable ABC now holds the string data type value. This gives us more flexibility to work, as sometimes we may wish to update the value of a particular variable. But while doing so, we must ensure that the same variable name is not declared twice in our code, like we have done in this code. Here, we have declared the variable ABC twice, and if you execute this code, it will not show any output. So this is how, using the keyword, we can define a variable in JavaScript. Now we have another way to define a variable using the var keyword. It is similar to that of the let keyword with a few differences. The let keyword has a block level scope, whereas the var keyword has function level or global scope. To simplify what we mean by this, let us have a look at these code snippets. If we have a look at the code in which we have defined the variable inside the var block and using it outside the code block, this code upon execution will print hello world. Whereas if we look at the other code in which we have defined the variable within the if block, if we execute this code, it will throw an error that the variable is not defined because the scope of the variable is limited to block level. Coming to the second difference, earlier we discussed that in case of let keyword, we cannot declare a same variable more than once. While in the case of var, we can declare the same variable more than once, but it has no significance. If we use var with an already declared variable, it is simply ignored. Also, we saw in case of let keyword, we need to initialize a variable in order to use it. But in case of let, we don't need to initialize the variable and can directly start using it. So, these are important differences between the let and var keyword. Interestingly, if you had noticed, a few moments ago, we said that in case of var, we don't need to initialize a variable. This means in our code, if we don't declare a variable, we can't say that it is var or let defined. As discussed in the earlier video, var is an older method to declare a variable which is still valid. This means that we need to be strict while defining a variable in our code to ensure that we define a variable by either using let or var keyword. Now to ensure strictness, we use strict in our code. Yes, I'm not kidding. Strict is the keyword we are going to use. So this is our code where we have not declared a variable. So we will use strict in our code like this. And this line of code will not allow the old syntax, that is var, to be valid in our code. If we execute it, it will not show us any output. It means that the variable is not defined. And we remove this line. The code will execute normally without any error. Moving on next. Suppose in our code we have a variable which we want to use multiple times. We know that a variable can be changed by assigning a new value. So how can we prevent that even by mistake the value of the variable should not change at all? For this we have const. Const is used to declare a constant variable whose value cannot be changed. So this was our variable whose value we don't want to change. We will add const where we are declaring the variable like this. Now the value of the variable ABC will remain constant throughout the code. If by mistake we try to change the value, the code will simply throw an error upon execution. That is, it will not show any output. So that was all about variables. But there is one more important thing left. That is how to name a variable. And for that, we have a few naming conventions. Let us look at them one by one. First, the variable name can contain alphanumeric characters, underscore, and even the dollar sign. If we recall in PHP, the dollar sign was not allowed while naming a variable. But in JavaScript, we get this flexibility. For example, underscore ABC, $ABC, ABC123 are all valid names. Next, we cannot start a variable name with a number. Example 123ABC is an invalid variable name in JavaScript. Speaking of invalid variable names, a variable name can also not contain special characters like exclamation, hyphen, hash, or any other special character. Lastly, the variable names in JavaScript are case sensitive. For example, small abc and capital ABC are both different variables. So that is it for this video. In the next video, we will explore operators in JavaScript. See you then. After going through this video, you will be able to explain the different types of operators and use them in a JS code. Hi, welcome back. Remember we discussed these 5 operators in the PHP module: arithmetic operators, assignment operators, increment-decrement operators, comparison operators, and logical operators. All these operators work in exactly the same way in case of JavaScript. So in this video, we will be exploring only those operators that are new or if they work in a different way in JavaScript. If you want to refresh your memory on operators, you may quickly go through the topic 2 of module 5. Let us start with arithmetic operators. In PHP, we studied the various arithmetic operators like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and modulo. These operators work exactly in the same way in JavaScript, so we won't be discussing them. However, in JavaScript, we have one more arithmetic operator, exponential operator, which is denoted by 2 asterisk symbol. For example, we have this code where we have two variables a and b. We have defined the values of these variables as 2 and 5 respectively. Then we have defined a variable abc, and using an exponential operator, we have assigned some value. Here, this exponential operator multiplies a variable by itself b times. In simpler terms, it means a to the power b. So, 2 to the power 5 is 32, and if you execute this code, you will get the same output. Next, we will move to assignment operators. Here also, the assignment operators such as equal to, plus equal to, minus equal to, multiple equal to, divide equal to, and modulo equal to works exactly the same way in JavaScript. We have one more assignment operator in case of JavaScript, that is exponential equal to operator. It is denoted by 2 asterisk symbols followed by an equal to sign. To understand this operator, let us take this example. Here, we have first initialized the variable abc variable with a value 2, and in the next line, we have used exponential equal to operator with a value 5. And in the last line of the code, we are printing the value of the variable abc. What this operator does, it multiplies the existing value of abc by itself 5 times and then reassigns it with the new result. So abc would become 2 to the power 5, which is 32. So this code prints 32. Next, we have increment and decrement operators, which work exactly the same as in case of PHP without any modifications. That is, using the increment and decrement operator in our variable, we will decrease or increase the value of the variable by 1 respectively. We will now move on to the comparison operators. Again, they are the same as we studied in PHP. The operator equal to, not equal to, less than, less than equal to, greater than, and greater than equal to work the same way in JavaScript also. Next, we have logical operators. So the operators and, or, and not work exactly the same as we studied in PHP. Let me check if you really remember what we have studied in the PHP module. Here are two expressions in which we have used and or operator respectively to combine two Boolean expressions. As per your understanding, what should be the value returned by the operators in both the cases? I will be only telling the answers so that it matches with the answer you have calculated. For this expression, the value returned will be false, and for this expression, it will be true. So it seems that you love these small equations. So I have another interesting question for you. What would be the value returned by the not operator in this case? I will give you a hint. The not operator reverses the Boolean value. Lastly, we have type of operator. Now, this is an entirely new operator which we did not discuss in PHP. But it is very easy to understand. It simply tells us the operand type. Like, say if the operand is numeric or string or any other data type. Let us see how we can use this operator. Say we have this code where we have declared the variable ABC and assigned it a value 2. To use this operator, we use the type of operator like this. The type of operator simply returns a string indicating the type of the operand. This means as the variable ABC holds an integer value, it will print number. And in case we have a string value instead of a number, it will print string in the output. So that was all about operators in JavaScript. Although there are a few more JS operators, but they are all beyond the scope of this training. Before we move to the quiz, I would request you to use all the operators which we have studied in this code and check the output on your own. Because in the quiz, module test and final test, you will get questions based on this topic. Up next is the quiz. All the best. After going through this video, you will be able to apply different conditional statements in a JavaScript code. Welcome back. Similar to the previous topic, we have already discussed conditional statements and loops in topic 3 and 4 of the PHP module. So in this topic, we will quickly brush through these concepts again and will highlight the differences where the conditional statements and loops work differently in JavaScript. We will be referring to a lot of code examples which we have used in the topics conditional statements and loops in PHP. So in case you need a revision, I would recommend you to go through these topics once before starting this video. Let us start with the conditional statements in this video. In PHP, we discussed these 4 conditional statements. That is, if statement, if-else statement, if-else-if-else statement, and switch statement. In JavaScript, we also have these conditional statements. And interestingly, all the conditional statements work in a similar way as in PHP. If we talk about the if statement in PHP, we have used this code to print even number if the remainder comes out to be 0. And if we write the same code in JavaScript, it will look like this. We can see there is no difference between these codes apart from the way things are written and defined in PHP and JavaScript. For example, the way we define a variable using a $sign in PHP and using let in JS. To print anything in PHP, we use echo, while in JS, we use document.write. Rest, all the things are the same. That is the way the if condition statement and the operators are used. Now, if we talk about executing the same programs using the if-else conditional statements in PHP and JS, they also work in the exact same manner. Next, if we talk about using if-else-if conditional statement, there is one slight difference. Here, on the left side, we have the PHP code in which we have used the if-else-if conditional statement, and on the right side, we have the JavaScript code for the same program. If you notice carefully, the only difference is the way else-if is written in JavaScript. In PHP, we do not add any space between else-if as it is used as a single word. But in case of JS, we add a space between else-if to use this conditional statement. Lastly, we will discuss the switch statement in this video. This time I will show the codes of PHP and JavaScript in which switch statement is used. Your task is to analyze the codes and tell whether the switch statement works in a similar manner in both the cases or not. Here are the codes. On the left side, we have the PHP code, and on the right side, we have the JavaScript code. You may pause the video to analyze these codes. So in both the cases, the switch statement works in the same manner. If you're still confused, Let me simplify this for you. Here, we have the expression operator that evaluates to any possible value. Now, based on the values we are expecting, we have different cases in our code. And depending on which case the value expression matches with, the corresponding code block will get executed. If the expression does not match with any of the case values provided, the default code block will get executed. So this was all about conditional statements in JavaScript. In the next video, we will see the loops in JavaScript. After going through this video, you will be able to apply different loops in a JavaScript code, explain for of, foreign loops in JavaScript, explain for each function in JavaScript. Welcome to the loops topic. Remember this example we discussed in the PHP module to understand the importance of loops? Also in that topic, we discussed these loops and how we can use break and continue keywords along with loops. In this video, we will see if all these loops work in the same way in JavaScript or not. So let's find out. We will start with the while loop. In PHP, we used the while loop to print the first 10 even numbers in this code. If we have to write the same code in JavaScript to print the first 10 even numbers, how will we do that? We will first start by defining the variable. Then, we will use the while loop and will define the condition which basically remains the same. After this, we will write a statement that prints the even number. And once the even number is printed, we will increment the value of the variable by 1. Once this code block gets successfully executed, the condition is evaluated again. And if the condition is again true, the block of code is executed again. This continues like a loop until the condition evaluates to false. Now, take a moment and compare both the codes. We will see that the way the while loop is written and executed is the same as we saw in PHP. This means that the while loop works the same way in JS as in PHP. We also executed the same program, that is to print the first 10 even numbers using the do while code. Now, before we see how do while loop is used in JS, here is a quick question to you. What are the two major points that make a do while loop different to that of a while loop? Let's see if you have the same answer as I have. Well, the first point is, in the do while loop, the condition is checked at the exit point instead of the entry point, as in the case of while loop. The second point is, even if the condition fails for the very first time, still the code block inside the loop will get executed. So, coming back to the code and how we can use the do while loop in it. The do while loop works in the same way in JavaScript as in PHP. The for loop, break, and continue keywords work exactly the same way in JavaScript as we have studied in the PHP module. This brings us to an exercise which you have to do on your own. The first part of the exercise is to write a code to print the first 10 even numbers using the for loop, and the next part is to write codes using break and continue keywords in JavaScript. The purpose of this video is to not only go through the concepts which we have already studied, but to also learn a few new things. Let's start with them, shall we? We have two types of new loops in JavaScript which were not in PHP. These are for of and foreign loops. We will only study a little bit about these loops in this topic and will deep dive into them in the arrays topic of this module. So don't worry even if things seem unclear at this moment. Now, things are going to become a bit tricky, so please pay attention. The for of loop in JavaScript is similar to that of for each loop in PHP. If you remember, we used this code in PHP to iterate through arrays. I will again explain this code to simplify things for better understanding. Here, we have an array ARR that contains 5 different numbers. This means that the loop will run for 5 times and there is no need to use an additional loop control variable. Then, we have a for each loop followed by the iteration. For each iteration, the different values of the array will be assigned to the variable num, which will be printed by this statement. And once all the numbers are printed, the loop will terminate itself. Similarly, if we write the same code using the foreign loop in JavaScript, it will be like this. Again, foreign loop in JavaScript is used to iterate through the arrays. Apart from the way we write the syntax in both cases, everything else remains the same. Next, we have the foreign loop. It is used exclusively for JavaScript objects. Now, what JavaScript objects are, we will learn about them later in the training. For now, you can visualize it to be an object to be a container for key value pairs, similar to associative arrays of PHP. This loop will iterate through all the key value pairs in an object. as difficult it may seem at the moment, the syntax is pretty simple. The syntax is for a variable name in followed by the names of the object we want to iterate through. Also, if we notice, to concatenate a string, we use a plus sign like we have used here. The loop runs as many times as the number of key value pairs in the object. And for each iteration, it picks up one key of the object and assigns it to a variable for us to use. We can name this variable anything as we want. Lastly, we have for each. Yes, you heard that right. In JS, we have for each, but it is not at all a loop which we discussed in PHP. This is the tricky part that I was talking about a few moments ago in the video. In JS, for each is used as a loop, but technically it is not a loop. It is basically a function and is used to iterate through arrays. We will learn more about for each in topic 6 of this module. I will again simplify. For each in PHP and for in JS are similar, but for each in PHP and for each in JS are not at all related. Hope you had fun watching this video. See you in the next one. Till then, all the best, because up next is a quiz. After going through this video, you will be able to explain how we can pass arguments to a function by a value and anonymous functions with the help of an example. Welcome to the next topic of this module. In this video, we will explore functions in JavaScript as we did in the PHP module. So, before we dive into this topic, let us quickly revise functions to refresh our memory. We will be using the same code which we used in PHP to understand functions, with the only difference that this time the code is written in JavaScript. So, a function is basically a block of code which is used to perform a specific task and has a name associated with it, which in this case is getMax. A function can even take in some data which it can use in performing some tasks. These data are known as function arguments. In our code, we have a and b as function arguments. Now, once the task has been performed, the function can also return back some data. Also, a function can take any number of arguments but can return only one value. To sum up, this piece of code is one part of the function, that is function definition. We have function name, function arguments, and a piece of code which defines what the function does. The next part of the function is function calling. This is the part where the function actually gets executed, or in technical terms, we say invoke a function. To call a function, we use the function name followed by the parentheses. Now within these parentheses, we provide comma-separated values that we want to pass to the function as function arguments. And when the function returns a value, we store it in a variable. And finally, we print the value. Before we move further, I have one question for you. Can we assign default values to the function arguments? If your answer is yes, then the next follow-up question is how? And if your answer is no, then you need a revision. I suggest you revisit the function topic of the PHP module. Next, we will move to one of the important concepts, call by value and call by reference. So please pay attention. Call by value and call by reference are the two ways through which we can pass arguments to a function. In JS, we cannot choose to pass arguments either by value or reference. It is always by value. Seems a bit tough. Let me first elaborate it and then we will look at one example to understand it. When we pass an argument to a function, the value of the original function is copied to the function argument. So, the function argument behaves as a separate independent variable and any change to it does not affect the original variable. Let us now look at an example. Here, we have a function named makeChanges and we have three function arguments a, b and c whose values we have defined within the function body. Next, outside the function, we have defined three more variables and their values, and then we are calling the function and printing the values. Can you guess the output of this code? You will have to wait some time for the answer, but before that, let us first understand how the execution happens. We have this first line of code which will be executed first. Next, we have a blank line which we can ignore. Then we have the function name and the arguments which will get executed. Now the execution starts from this part of the code, that is outside the function. We have defined three variables x, y and z. For x, we have a value 4 and for y and z variables, we have defined the value to be an array. Next, when the execution comes to this line where we are calling the function, the code execution goes to this part and where it looks for the value of x, y, and z variables. At this moment, you can think of the value of a to be equal to x, b equal to y, and c equal to z. Now inside the function body, we have the value of a as 5. This means that now the x variable will hold the value 5 and not 4. This value will be held only internally as we are not returning the value of a anywhere in the code. This means the value of a still remains 4, and when the code will print the value of x, it will be 4 only. Note down this value somewhere as we will be matching the calculated output with the actual output after some time. So always remember, if we pass a number to a function as an argument, and even if we make any changes to that argument variable inside the function, the original variable remains unaffected unless we return the argument variable from the function and replace the original variable. Similarly, if we pass an array to a function as an argument, and if we change the argument variable itself to store a different array, it will not affect the original array variable. This means the array value of b variable will be replaced in the array value of y variable, and in the output, we will get the value as 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10, that is the even numbers. Again, note down the output for this variable. The way we are noting down the output might seem a bit confusing as there is no space between the numbers. But if we consider this case, that is, if we pass an array to a function as an argument, and instead of changing the argument variable to store a different array, we use the argument variable to change an element of the array, the original array variable also gets changed accordingly. This means here the value of the first index for the array z will be replaced by 8, and the remaining indices values will remain as such. This makes our output as 8, 4, 6, 8, and 10 when we will print the z variable. So let us first combine the output of all the variables x, y, and z. It will become 4, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 8, 4, 6, 8, and 10. Let us run this code and match the output with what we have calculated. See, we got the same output as expected. To summarize, in JavaScript, arguments are always passed by value. For arrays and objects, if we change the argument variable itself, the original variable remains unaffected. But if we change the internals of the argument variable, the original variable also gets changed. Also, the concept of call by value is the same for objects as well. Don't worry if it seems confusing at this point. Things will become easy and simple as you will spend more time working with the language. Next, we have functions that literally do not have any name, and we call them as anonymous functions. As interesting as the name sounds, the more interesting and simple these functions are to understand. Let us take an example to understand them. We have a function that performs some task and stores the value in the p variable. Now what if we remove the name of the function, that is, multiply and make it as an anonymous function? How are we going to invoke a function in such a case? Just think for a moment. For such cases, we store the anonymous function in a variable. All we have to do now is put a semicolon at the end, and we call this whole block as a variable assignment. So now we can call the function the same way as we used to, like this, without any change. Now you may wonder, what's the point in having an anonymous function when we are anyway storing it in a variable in order to call it? Wouldn't it be better if we instead name the function itself? Well, this is a valid question. Anonymous functions are mainly used in objects. We will understand their significance in the next topic. There are still a few things to learn and explore about functions, which we will continue to do in the next video. See you then. After going through this video, you will be able to pass a function as an argument, define a function using the arrow function. Let us continue our discussion on functions. In this video, we will explore two new concepts, function as arguments and arrow functions. Let us discuss them one by one, starting with function as arguments. As the name suggests, we can also pass functions as an argument, which can be further executed inside a function at some point of time. The function which is passed to a function is called a callback. Let us examine how we can pass a function as an argument using this code. Please take a moment to first analyze this code on your own, and then I will explain it. Here, we have defined an anonymous function which takes two arguments and returns their product. We have assigned this anonymous function to a variable named multiply. Similarly, we have defined another function which also gets two arguments and returns their sum. We have assigned this anonymous function to a variable named add. Notice that both these variables are assignments. Then we have defined two variables a and b. The value of a is equal to 5 and b is equal to 20. Next, we have defined another function with the name action that takes three arguments. We will come to the details of this function in a while. Here, we are calling the action function and passing the variables a, b, and add to it. Important thing to note here is that add is a variable here which contains an anonymous function. We are not calling the add function here. We are passing the function stored in the add variable to the action function. Had the code been like this, then it would call the add function. And whatever the function would return would be passed to the action function as the third argument. Let us remove this function part and continue from here, that is, the point where we are calling the function. I hope things are clear till now. We have an action function, x stores y stores 20, and z stores an anonymous function that takes two arguments and returns their sum. So inside the action function, we are calling this anonymous function using the z variable and passing it two arguments, x and y, having values 5 and 20 respectively. This is when this anonymous function gets invoked. Now here, x is 5 and y is 20. It adds them and stores the sum 25 in variable s and returns it to from where it was called, that is, let r equal to z x y. So r variable now stores the returned value, that is 25, which then returns to from where it was called, that is, let r equal to action a b add. This means that the value 25 will be printed in the output. Let us run the code and confirm. Here we go. We can see 25 is the output. Coming back to our code, instead of the add function, we can even pass the other anonymous function to action. Now why don't you try this on your own and observe the output? Lastly, in this video, we will discuss arrow functions. Arrow function is an alternate way to define a function. Let us see how. We know that normally a function is defined like this. Then we saw how we can define a function without any name, that is anonymous function. Now the same function can be defined like this using an arrow function. The syntax is very easy to understand. We just remove the function name and add an equal to sign followed by a greater than symbol between the arguments and starting curly braces. Rest all the code remains the same. Now this syntax where we have defined the function using an arrow function can further be shortened. It depends on two conditions. First, if the function has only one line of code that only returns the value, and second, if the function has only one argument. Let us have a look at the syntax for the first case. So when we have a function that only returns the value, we remove the curly brackets that encapsulate the function body. We also remove the return statement. It is understood that the expression is returned by the function. Now coming to the second point, where we have only one argument, in this case, we can even remove the argument brackets. So these are the different ways through which we can define a function. It might feel a bit overwhelming to learn all these ways to define a function, but believe me, these ways are commonly used by web developers as they are a concise way to write the code. The only thing that can make us comfortable is to practice more and more. So keep practicing and everything will look like a cakewalk to you. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Up next is a quiz. All the best. After going through this video, you will be able to explain objects in JavaScript, create an object using JavaScript, access properties of an object using a dot operator and square brackets. Hi, welcome to the next topic. In the previous topic, we used the word objects at several places but never discussed it. Well, now the time has come to get familiar with objects and learn about them. Like integer, string, array, an object is also a data type. An object is a collection of variables. Let us take this code to discuss these points. Here, we have an object named dog. Next, we have three variables here, breed, height, and age. All of these variables, if you look carefully, are storing values of different data types, that is, string and integer data type. This means an object can store values of any data type. This is another important point about objects which you may want to note down. As these variables are attached to an object, they are thus called properties. This makes the breed, height, and age properties of the object dog. Now in an object, you can also store functions as we have done in this code. And the functions in an object are referred to as methods. Now that we have got a basic understanding of objects, let us now see how we can create an object in JavaScript. Creating an object in JavaScript is a very simple and easy process. And the first step to create an object is the object initializer. It starts and ends with curly braces. With curly braces, we define all the properties and methods along with their values. Each property is separated using a comma, and each property and its value are separated using a colon. Next, we have the dot operator. In an object, a dot operator is used to access the property or the method. In our code, if we want to access the properties, we can use the dot operator like this. Using dog.breed, we can access the breed property and it would refer to golden retriever. Similarly, we can use dog.height and dog.age to access the properties. Now, we can access the function using the same way, but if we want to call it, we need to use the parenthesis. Using the dot operator, we can also assign a new value to any property. All we have to do is to use the dot operator with the property whose value we want to change, and using an equal to operator, assign the new value like this. Not only this, we can even define a new property using a dot operator. Example, for the class dog, if we want to add the new weight property, we can do like this. Note that I am adding the value between inverted commas as the value is a string. So let us print this value. I hope things so far are simple and interesting. Apart from the dot operator, we have square brackets through which we can access the properties of an object. To access them, we first write the name of the object and then within the square brackets we write the name of the property which we want to access inside the inverted commas. Similarly, for height and age property, we can use square brackets like this to access the properties. Like a dot operator, square brackets also give us flexibility to edit an existing property or define a new property. So based on our understanding, both the dot operator and the square brackets help us to access properties of an object. Also, they both allow us to edit any existing property or even define a new property. So out of these, which one should we use and why? You may pause the video and think for a moment. Well, the answer is right in front of us in the first point here. Using a dot operator, we can even access the method or call a function which the square brackets does not allow. So, we will stick to using a dot operator in this training. Let us come back to our code. We deliberately did not discuss this line of code as the concept of dot operator was not known till then. But now, as we are aware about the role of a dot operator and how an object is created, let us see what this means. As we know, properties and methods cannot be accessed directly. We must access them with the object they are a part of. Even inside the object, we cannot access properties directly. We must access them with the object they are a part of. The this keyword here refers to the object the function is a part of, and that is the current object in which the function is defined. This means that here it refers to the dog object. With this, we come to the end of this video, where we discussed objects and how we can create one. Well, there are still more ways through which we can create an object, which we will continue to learn and explore in the next video. Stay tuned. After going through this video, you will be able to create an object using new object and a function constructor. Hi, we will continue our discussion on how we can create an object using different ways. So the next way to create an object is by using new object. The syntax is simple. Let followed by the name of the object we want, equal to operator, and then new object. Let us create the same object dog using new object, and we can create it like this. Remember, the object dog which we just created does not have any properties inside it. This means that the object dog is empty and is equivalent to this code. Once we have created the object, we can then add the properties using the dot operator. As you can see, the way we are defining properties is something we have already seen and is fairly simple. So, as long as we get the concept and understand the logic, objects in JS will be easy to understand. Now, we have the third way to create an object, and that is through a function constructor. We can define a function constructor as a normal function whose job is to create an object. Let's try to understand it with this code. Here, we have multiple objects but similar to each other. That is, we have 3 car objects with appropriate details. All the objects have a few things in common. First, each object tells us about a car. Next, each object has 3 common properties: make, model, and year. The values of these properties are different for different objects. Next, we have one method that is common in all the objects. So, we can say that whenever a car object is created, these 3 properties must be present along with the display method, and for that, we use a function constructor. Let us simplify this code for better understanding. We will start with the first line where we have a function named as car and take 3 arguments: make, model, and year. Then we have written this dot make, which means that we are expecting an object here. And we have assigned the make property of the object with the value that the function receives. Similarly, we have this dot model and this dot year where we are expecting an object. Now, here are 2 questions that might come to your mind out of curiosity. First, where is this object coming from, and which is this object we are referring to here in our code? To know the answer to these questions, we need to first see how we can call this function. When we call this function by passing 3 arguments, the function will be called and 3 arguments will get the respective values. But the moment the code encounters this, it will throw an error as there is no object. So now the solution to this error is by calling the function by using the new keyword. This will assign the respective values to the 3 arguments, that is, make will be Hyundai, model will be i20, and the year will be 2014. If you notice, we have called this function using the new keyword. This creates a new object. So in our code, when it encounters this keyword, it will now refer to this new object. And we are initializing the make property of this new object with the value we are passing, that is Hyundai. The same goes for model and year property. And once the object is created, using the same way, we can access the properties and methods using the dot operator. Things now really become simple if we want to create a new object. We can do that in just one line code as we have the function constructor in place like this. Look at this code. We can say that car1, car2, and car3 are objects of the type car. This means that any object of this type will have the same properties and method, but with different values. With this, we will come to understand the significance of a function constructor. If we know the details of a function constructor, we can also know the properties and methods of the objects created using the function constructor. We will elaborate more on this when we will learn arrays and strings in the upcoming topics. With this, we come to the end of this topic. Hope you had fun watching this video. In the next video, we will look at another method to create an object using classes. After going through this video, you will be able to create an object using classes. So far, we have studied 3 different ways to create an object. The first way was using the object initializer. The second way was using the new object. And the third way was using the function constructor. In this video, we will look at the 4th way to create an object, and that is using classes. This method was introduced in JavaScript in 2015 with ES6. If you have understood how to create an object using a function constructor, then this would be super easy for you to understand. Earlier, we saw how we can create an object using a function constructor. Well, for classes, the syntax is pretty much similar. Everything which was earlier inside the car function in case of function constructor is now inside the function named constructor in case of classes. Further, the constructor function is inside a class. Now, an important question that you might ask: what is the need of creating an object using classes if it is similar to function constructor? You may pause the video and think for a moment. To help you nudge in the right direction, I will give you a small hint that the reason has to do something with class. So, one of the most important reasons for creating an object using classes is that it provides a convenient syntax to people who are coming from other programming language backgrounds like C and C++. The other reason is, using the class notation, we can bring the function declaration outside the constructor. One important thing to notice is that we are no longer using the function keyword along with the display method. Now, rest of the things remain the same, like the way the objects are created and the way properties and methods are accessed. Lastly, in this video, we will go through the for in loop, which we have already discussed in the loops topic of this module. The reason why we are discussing it again is because objects are exclusively used in JavaScript, and they iterate through all the properties in an object. So let's revise them again using the car example. Let us create an object first, and for that we will use classes. We will define classes and then construct a function with arguments. We will then add all the properties, and outside the constructor function, we will define the function. We will then define the objects, and lastly, we will use the for in loop. Here, we are iterating through the car1 object and printing the value of all its properties. And to concatenate the string, we are using a plus operator. Now, what will be the output of this code is something I will leave to you to check on your own. With this, we come to the end of objects in JavaScript, where we learned 4 ways to create an object. Before we proceed to the quiz, I will say one important thing. Objects are like jack of all trades. If you have understood the objects, you have understood the JavaScript. Adios. See you in the next topic. After going through this video, you will be able to explain arrays, define an array in JavaScript, explain push method and pop method, explain how for loop is used in an array with the help of an example. It is time to discuss one of my personal favorite topics, and that is arrays. You might think that we have already studied arrays in the previous module, that is PHP. So how is it different this time? Well, believe me, the scope that the arrays offer in JavaScript is much different from what we have learned in PHP. We will begin with a short and crisp introduction to arrays to see what we know about them so far. An array is a special type of variable that can store multiple values, provided they are of the same type. In PHP, we learned that there are two types of arrays. One is numeric indexed and the other is associative arrays. In JavaScript, there are only numeric indexed arrays and no associative arrays. The objects which we discussed in detail in the previous topic behave as an array but are more advanced than arrays. We will come to that in a while in this video. Now, before we proceed to see how arrays are defined in JavaScript, here is a task for you. I will give you a scenario and you have to define a numeric indexed array using PHP, which you have learned already. The variable name is modules, and to store the values inside this array, you can take them as the names of the first 4 modules of this training, that is HTML, CSS, Bootstrap and DBMS. You may pause the video to write it down and then we will match with the correct answer. So, this is how you might have defined the array using PHP. If we want to define this same array using JavaScript, the syntax is simple and almost similar to PHP. First, we define the variable using the let keyword, and then inside the square brackets, we define the values we want to store separated by commas. In JavaScript, to define an array, we don't use an array keyword when compared to PHP. Like in PHP, in JavaScript also, each value stored in an array corresponds to a particular array index starting with 0. Again, if we want to access any array element, we do that by using its array index inside a square bracket like this. So, module 0 will help us access the first array element, HTML. Module 1 will access CSS and so on. Also, arrays make it convenient to edit any existing array element or to add a completely new element to the array. Now, what is a new array? Well, we have now two Bootstrap, one at index 1 and another at index 2, and we have a new array element, PHP at index 4. This was some basic stuff which I believe you are already familiar with. Now, It is trying to deep dive into arrays. And the first thing we will learn is that arrays are objects. JavaScript allows us to define arrays using objects. The syntax is simple. We define an array the way we create a new object, and all the array elements are passed as arguments. Here, instead of the keyword object, we must have array keyword, which means that there must be a class or a function constructor with the name array. This also means all the objects of the type array, including modules in this case, will contain some specific properties and methods. In fact, arrays in JavaScript are pure objects. It just allows us to define and use as primitive for easier use. Even when we define an array as primitive, it is still an object of the type array and can be used as one. Similarly, even if an array is defined as an object, we can access its elements as primitive using array indices. Next, every array in JavaScript has two methods, and they are push method and pop method. There are more methods, but these two methods are always present in every object of the type array. Let us understand the role of both these methods one by one. So, the push method allows us to add a new array element at the end of the array. Earlier, we defined this array where we had 4 elements. Now, if we want to add the fifth element PHP to this array, we can use the push method like this. This will add the PHP as the fifth element of the array. Next, we have the pop method. It fetches the last element of the array and then removes it from the array. So, we added a new element to this array a few moments back. Now, if we use pop method to this array, it will first fetch or select the last array element, that is PHP, and will remove this element from the array. This will again make the number of array elements as 4. Lastly, in this video, we will see for-of loops in arrays. If you remember, for-of loops are exclusively used in arrays, and it iterates through all the elements of the array. Let us have a look at an example. Here, we are iterating through the modules array and printing all its elements. The syntax is for a variable name of the name of the array we want to iterate through, which in this case is modules. The loop runs as many times as the number of elements in the array. And in each iteration, it picks up one element of the array and assigns it to a variable for us to use. We can name this variable anything as we want. Now, what would be the output of this code? This is something you need to find out on your own. With this, we come to the end of this video. In the next video, we will continue to explore more concepts. After going through this video, you will be able to explain for each, map, and filter with the help of an example. Previously, we had a look at two methods, push and pop, that are always present in every object of the type array. In this video, we will look at some more array methods, namely for each, map, and filter. Let us discuss them in detail one by one, starting with the for each loop. If you remember, in the topic 3, that is conditional statements and loops of this module, we said for each is used as a loop, but technically it is not a loop. It is basically a function and is used to iterate through arrays. You are already familiar with this code. Here, we have an array that has 5 array elements, or we can say it has to be an object. Since it is an object of type array, it contains some specific methods in which for each is another such method. So in the next line of code, we are calling the for each method and passing an anonymous function to it. Now, what does this anonymous function do? It simply takes an element and prints it. To avoid any confusion, I will again mention that here we are only calling the for each method and not the anonymous function. Now this anonymous function is called inside the for each method. Can you guess how many times the anonymous function will be called? If your answer is 5, you are right. This is because we have 5 elements in the array, so the anonymous function will be called 5 times, and each time one element of the array will be passed to it. This is the reason we say that for each is not a loop, but it acts like a loop. I hope that this explanation helps you get better clarity of this code. And if it seems complicated, let me explain the same code in another way. This code can also be written like this. Here, we are storing the anonymous function into the variable print element. And then we are calling the for each function here and passing this print element function to the for each function. This means for every element, we are calling the print element function and passing the elements one by one to it. This will again print all the elements of the array. So, we can freely choose the way we want to use the for each method, as it entirely depends upon us, and writing in either way makes no difference. Before we proceed further, here is an exercise for you. Write the syntax for this code using an arrow function. Next, we will discuss the map method. It is also specific to array objects. It runs on an array and creates a new array as a result of passing every element of the array to a provided function. Let's elaborate this with this example and understand the code line by line. Here, we have an array numbers that has 5 elements, which are basically the numbers from 1 to 5. In the next line, we are calling the map method and passing an anonymous function to it. Note that here we are using an array function to define the anonymous function. So, what does the anonymous function exactly do? Any guesses? This anonymous function takes a number as an argument and returns its square. And how exactly does the anonymous function be called? The map method helps to call the anonymous function for every element of the array numbers. This means that the function will run for 5 times for the values 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 and will return the values 1, 4, 9, 16 and 25 respectively. As we said earlier, that the map method runs on an array and creates a new array. So, the values returned by the map method, that is 1, 4, 9, 16 and 25, are stored in a new array which we are storing in a new variable, squares. And finally, using these lines of code, we are printing all the elements stored in the variable squares using for each loop. So far, we have studied two methods in this video, that is for each and map, and I hope you have understood how these methods work. We will now discuss the third method, filter. As the name suggests, this method is used to create a filter on the elements of an array using a condition provided by the function. It then creates a new array based on the filtered elements. We will use the same code to understand the filter method which we took during the map method. Let us make a few changes in this code. First, as we said a moment ago, that the filter method works to filter elements of an array based on the condition provided by a function. So, if we look at our code, we don't have any condition. So let's add one. Suppose we want to print only those array elements that are even. So, we need to make modifications in our code accordingly. First, we need to change the way we are defining the function, because initially, this function was taking the argument and was returning its square. So we will update the function as x modulo 2 equal to 0. This will return only those values that are even. We also need to change the function name from map to filter. We will also change the variable name squares to say even numbers, which is more appropriate in our case. So, the values returned by the filter method will be stored in a new array, which we are then storing in the variable even numbers. Rest of the code works in the same way, which we have already discussed previously. So we will skip this part. To summarize, we discussed 3 array methods in this video: for each, map and filter, and with the help of an example, saw how they can be used. Now, I would recommend you to try and execute all the codes explained in the video. That's it for this video. In the next video, we will explore some more concepts. After going through this video, you will be able to explain the rest parameter with the help of an example, spread operator with the help of an example. Rest parameters were included in 2015 into the JavaScript, which allows us to protect an indefinite number of arguments passed to a function in the form of an array. They are denoted by 3 dots, which are added before a variable name. Let us elaborate it with the help of an example. Here, we have a function named calculateSum, and in the argument of this function, we have used a rest parameter named args. No matter how many arguments we pass, whether it be 2, 10, 100 or even 1000, all the arguments will be converted into a single array with the help of the rest parameter. Now coming to the role of the function calculateSum that we have defined. Its role is to calculate the sum of all the arguments passed to the function. Now, inside the function, we are iterating through the collected array using the for each loop and calculating the sum of all the elements of the array. This means the output of this code should be 24 space 35. Let us run this code and validate our output. it matches with the one we have calculated. So this is how we can pass an indefinite number of arguments using a REST parameter. Now, what if we have some specific argument variables that we want to define for the function calculate sum, like for example a and b? Can we still use the REST parameter in such a case? Well, the answer is yes. We can partially collect the arguments in the form of an array by providing some specific argument variables before the REST parameter. Let us see how. So, first we have already added the arguments a and b to the function calculate sum. Now, if we look at the function body, we are not passing the arguments a and b anywhere, and it makes no sense. So to include these arguments in the sum, we need to change this 0 to a plus b. This will now ensure that the arguments a and b are added to the array. The remaining code will remain as such, and if we again check the output, it will be the same to the one we calculated previously. Now, out of curiosity, what if we don't change the code here? That is, let sum equal to 0 and not a plus b. Can you guess the output in such a case? You may pause the video and think for a moment. If you have guessed it as 16 and 27, you are correct, and this means you have understood the logic of the code. Now you might be interested to know how we came to this output. So the first two values here and here are of the arguments a and b respectively. And since we are not passing those arguments anywhere in our code, these arguments are not being added. This means these two numbers and these three numbers are being added, which is the reason we got the output as 16 and 27. Now let us move to spread operators. A spread operator spreads or expands a variable into more than one, and it spreads an array into its element. It is also denoted by 3 dots before a variable name. Let us understand it with the help of this code. Here we have defined two arrays, odd and even. The odd array stores the first 5 odd numbers, and the even array stores the first 5 even numbers. What we want to do is to combine these two arrays into a single array named numbers. So to do that, we use the spread operator. Odd triple dot odd separator will convert the odd array into its elements, and so will the triple dot even spread operator. Next, we have put both these arrays together to form a new array and are storing it in the variable numbers. And then, using the for each method, we are calling the function and printing the array elements. Before we check the output, I would like you to first jot down the expected output as per your understanding of the code. So the output is 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 2, 4, 6, 8 and 10. That is, first all the odd numbers are printed and then the even numbers. With this, we have come to the end of this video and the topic. Hope you are having fun and practicing what is being taught. See you in the next topic. Bye-bye. After going through this video, you will be able to explain strings, define a string, explain and use template literals, and explain strings as objects. Welcome to another exciting topic, strings. This topic is going to be a piece of cake based on the challenges we have taken up so far in this training. If you remember, in the PHP module, topic 6, we have already discussed strings in detail. So in this video, we will first quickly brush up with what strings are and how we can define them. And later, we will see how they are different in JavaScript from what we have learned in PHP, plus a few more related concepts. Let's get started. When we open a website or a blog, what is the first thing that we usually use? Well, the first thing that attracts our attention, and I think you will also agree, is the text displayed on the website that tells us about the website and provides us some relevant information. So, all the text that we see and is displayed on a website is basically a string. Strings in layman terms means any text or a string of characters. Whether we talk about numbers or alphabets or alphanumerics, they are all strings. And to define a string, they are always enclosed within quotes. We can use either single or double quotes. It entirely depends on us which we want to use. But make sure that you are consistent. That means we should only use a particular type of quote to define a string. If we mix a single and a double quote, the code will throw an error. Just like in PHP, we can remove the special meaning out of the special characters using escape sequences. Remember this code that we executed in PHP? If you do not remember, let me help you to quickly revise what we did in this case. Here, we were able to print the name Joey inside the double quotes using the escape sequence in the echo statement. These escape sequences removed the special meaning from the double quotes, due to which we were able to print the name Joey inside the double quotes. Similarly, in JavaScript, if we want to remove the special meaning out of any special character, we can use the escape sequence. Now, let us proceed to the next concept, concatenation. Concatenation or concatenate in simplest terms means to link or join together. In JavaScript, we can concatenate strings using a string concatenation operator that is denoted by a plus sign. Let me show you how it is done. Say we have a variable A for which we have the string as India1 and variable B having string value as the match. Now we want to concatenate these two strings to make a meaningful sentence. So what will we do? We will take a third variable C and will concatenate the variables A and B that hold the string values for A and B respectively using the plus sign. Finally, we will print the variable C. Let's check the output. So we can see that the strings are concatenated. There is no space between one and the, so we can add a space here to make the output look cleaner. So that was about how to concatenate strings. Now let's move to another interesting concept, template literals. Before we jump to see what template literals is and how it is used in a code, first we need to understand why they are required. We will take this code for reference. Here we have a variable name with the string value Joey. We have another variable s with the string value hello name. In the next line, we are printing the value that the variable s holds. Now, when we execute the code, the output will always show as hello name because it recognizes the name as a string instead of the variable. This means we cannot print a variable within a string. So here comes template literals into the picture. Template literals are the strings enclosed by backtick. You can find the backtick symbol above the tab key in your keyboard. It allows us to print a variable within a string. Coming back to our code, as we said, template literals are the strings enclosed by backtick. So here we will enclose this string using a backtick to make it a template literal. Next, to print a variable within a string, we use a $sign followed by open and close curly braces within the template literals. Inside these curly braces, we add the variable whose value we want to replace, which in our case is name. So we have put the name inside the curly braces preceded by a $sign. Let's run the code again. We can see that we have been able to pass the variable within a string. Template literals have a lot of applications, but as it is a beginner level training, we will only learn this much at this moment. Lastly, in this video, we will discuss strings as objects. Like in the case of arrays, JavaScript allows us to define strings also as objects. The syntax is simple. We define a string the way we create a new object, and the string value is passed as arguments. Here, instead of the keyword object, we have string keyword, which means that there must be a class or a function constructor with the name string. This also means all the objects of the type string, including str in this case, will contain some specific properties and methods. Speaking of properties, we have one property length, which is present in every object of the type string. Length property, as the name suggests, helps us to know the length of a string. We will take one of the easiest examples to understand this. We have a variable whose string value is hello world. So, if we want to know the length of this string, in the print statement, we need to use the keyword length along with the variable that is holding the string value and a dot in between them. Can you guess the length of this string? If you have calculated it as 12, you are right. The string hello takes a length of 5 and then a single space, which means 1 length, and then 5 length for world and 1 length for the exclamation mark. This makes the total length as 12. So when we want to calculate the length of a string, note that the spaces and the special symbols are also included in the string length. Based on this, here is a fun exercise for you. Calculate the length of this string, which is basically a famous spell from the Harry Potter movie. You can copy the string name from below the video. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Up next is an exercise followed by a quiz. All the best. After going through this video, you will be able to explain DOM, access HTML elements using DOM. In the first topic of this module, we briefly discussed some uses of JavaScript, such as how it is used in the front end of a website to make it more interactive. In this video, let us dive deeper to understand JavaScript as a client-side language. JavaScript, as you already know, is a client-side scripting language, means it gets executed on the user's browser after the web page has been loaded. And due to this, it has two special features. First, JavaScript allows us to capture various user actions in the form of JavaScript events. For example, when we view a website and if click or hover or press any key from the keyboard, JavaScript can capture this interaction. Second, using JavaScript, we can make changes to the existing HTML elements of a web page even after they have been rendered by the browser. These changes happen because of some user interaction like click, hover, or pressing any key from the keyboard. Therefore, it gives JavaScript the power to create highly interactive web pages. That is, when a user does something changes on the screen. Let us see how we can capture JavaScript events. But first, we need to understand how JavaScript can access the HTML elements of the web page. We can access the HTML elements of a web page using DOM. DOM stands for Document Object Model. It is a programming interface that helps to access the HTML elements of a web page in the form of JavaScript objects. JavaScript has a predefined object with the name document that has some predefined properties and methods in it. Using this document object and the methods it has, we can access any HTML element on the web page. Let us understand this with the help of these code snippets. You know that whenever we write a JavaScript code, there are essentially two files on which we are writing code. One is the HTML file and the other is the JavaScript file, which is included in the HTML file inside the script tags. So here we have a code snippet that must be included in the JavaScript file. And we have this HTML code that must be included in the HTML file. If you look carefully, we have the document object here. Then this document object has an object named getElementById. Please note the capital letters used in the method name. Now, this method takes a string that denotes the ID attribute of any HTML element. This means the getElementById method in this case will return the HTML element that has the ID attribute set as ABC. You know that when we assign an ID attribute to any HTML element, we know that there is not more than one HTML element of the same type on the web page. Otherwise, we would have used the class attribute. This means that the getElementById method will return only one element. But this method returns the HTML element in the form of another JavaScript object of the type node. If you are wondering what a node object is, don't worry. Let me explain it first. We already have seen array type objects and string type objects, and we know that these objects contain some specific properties and methods. Similarly, we have node type objects which contain some specific properties and methods. Note that we don't create this object explicitly. They are returned by a function which in our case is getElementById. Node object always represents a specific HTML element. Here, L is a JavaScript object of type node that represents the paragraph with ID equal to ABC. This node object contains some specific properties and methods. We will talk about the properties and methods that L or any other node object contains in a while. Before that, let's look at some more methods that the document object contains. The first is getElementsByClassName. Let us also have a look at the HTML and JS code to understand it better. So, apart from getElementById, the object has another method, getElementsByClassName. Again, note the capital letters and the S after the element in the name. You will understand shortly why we use S in the elements. This method takes a string that denotes the class attribute of the HTML elements. The getElementsByClassName method in this case will return all the HTML elements that have the class attribute set as XYZ. Since there can be more than one element on a web page with the same class attribute, the getElementsByClassName method will always return an array of elements, hence the S in the elements. Even if we have only one element with the defined class name, this method will still return an array containing just one element in that case. And the elements of this array will be all JavaScript objects of the type node, representing each element in the web page that matches the given class name. In this case, ELS is an array that contains two objects, one representing the H1 and the other representing the P, as these are the two elements with class name equal to XYZ. Let us now move on to the next method, getElementsByTagName. This method takes a string that denotes the tag name. The getElementsByTagName method in this case will return all the P or paragraph elements. We can give any tag name like A, H1 or div as a string if our HTML contains these elements. The getElementsByTagName method will also return an array, and the elements of this array will be all JavaScript objects of the type node. Lastly, we have another interesting method, querySelectorAll. This method takes a string that denotes a CSS selector. The querySelectorAll method in this case will return all the HTML elements that match the CSS selector .xyz, meaning having the class attribute set as xyz. Here, we will have to write the CSS selector exactly as we would write in our CSS. Notice the dot in .xyz. And we can use any CSS selector here, like div greater than P, div A, etc. The querySelectorAll method will also return an array, and the elements of this array will be all JavaScript objects of the type node. So in this video, we learned that a document object consists of some predefined methods and properties. Methods we have already covered in detail. And in the next video, we will explore the properties. After going through this video, you will be able to access HTML elements using DOM, create interactive web pages. In the previous video, we discussed that the objects have some predefined methods and properties that can be further used to either make changes to the corresponding HTML elements or capture any user action on them. We have already covered the methods. Let us discuss the properties now. The first is innerHTML property. It helps to fetch the content of the element. Let us understand how it works. Say, we have this code where we have initialized the EL node object that represents the paragraph with the ID equals to ABC. So right below it, we add this line of code to use this property. So, innerHTML property fetches the content of the element. Let us check the output. So here, the l.innerHTML is fetching the content of the paragraph and we are displaying it on the screen using the alert box. We can also use this property to change the element's content. And to do that, we need to add this line of code. Let us check the output. Once we click on the OK button, the next line of code gets executed. This is where we are changing the content of the paragraph element, and you can see it changes to this is some new content. It can also be used to change the CSS property of any element with the style property. The only thing we need to ensure is that the style property has to be followed by the specific CSS property, like color, background color, or the font size. Like in this example, after the style property, we are using color CSS property with its respective value. Well, that was all about innerHTML property. Next, we have another inbuilt property that acts as event handlers, and onClick is one example that is used to capture user clicks. Let us have a look at how the onClick event handler works. Here, we have assigned a function to the onClick event handler that will execute when the onClick event occurs, that is, when the user clicks on the specific element. Events are captured on specific elements. In this case, when the paragraph with ID equals to ABC is clicked, then the function gets executed. This function has no impact if the user clicks anywhere or any other element of the web page. There are many event handlers and they go by the name onEventName. Like onMouseOver. As the name suggests, it gets triggered when the user moves the mouse over the specified element. Please note, the event handlers continue to run forever, till the web page is closed. If the web page is kept open and a user clicks the element even after a couple of hours, the function still gets executed. And if the paragraph is never clicked, the function never gets executed. So, the binding of the event handler with the said function happens immediately, but the function gets executed only after the event takes place. So far in this video, we have studied innerHTML property and onClick event handler. When we combine both these properties together, we can create highly interactive web pages. That is, when a user clicks on some HTML on the web page, the HTML elements of the web page changes. Let us see how. So here, when the user will click the paragraph with id equals to abc, we are calling a function that will change the content of the paragraph and as well its color to red. Let us check the output. So right now we can see the content as this is a paragraph. Let me click on this element. See, we have been successfully able to change the HTML element and color using on-click event handler. We can do a whole lot more with the right use of JavaScript. Please note, the event handler or any other properties or methods that we discussed here can run only on the node object directly and not on an array of node objects. So, when we fetch elements with class name or tag name, we get an array of node objects. For them, we will have to first extract an individual level node object and then use the properties and methods on that individual node object. There is an alternative way of using event handlers, that is, we use them as attributes to HTML elements. Let us see how. Here, instead of first fetching the element and assigning the event handler to it as a property, we simply add the event handler to the element's attribute and make a function call into it. Note the parenthesis here. And whatever code we want to execute on the occurrence of the event, we write it inside this function. Please note, all the changes we do on the web page using JavaScript are temporary, as the changes happen only on the browser level, after the web page is being rendered. The moment we refresh the web page, everything is back to the same, as a new request is being initiated and the web page is fetched again. Well, that was all about object properties and how we can create interactive web pages using JavaScript. Hope you enjoyed watching this video. Up next is a quiz. All the best. After going through this video, you will be able to debug a JavaScript code using inspect element. Hi, previously we learned how we can debug or explore HTML and CSS using the inspect element. In this video, let us learn and see how we can debug JS code. To do this, let us open the output of the HTML code which we have written in the previous topic. We already know how to open the inspect element. We right click on the web page and then select the inspect element option. This opens a panel which we are already familiar with. We have previously explored the Elements tab quite a bit, and below it on the left side we can see the HTML code, and on the right side we can see the corresponding CSS code. Now, as we will be debugging JavaScript, we are only concerned with the Sources tab. Please note that using the Elements tab we can debug CSS, and using the Sources tab we debug JavaScript. Let us click on the Sources tab. We can see a panel that is divided into three parts. On the left side, we will find all the resources that the web page has requested. For example, if a web page has requested some CSS and JS files, they will also be listed here on the left side. Not only this, if a web page has requested images or fonts, they will also be listed here. For our web page, the panel starts with 127.0.0.1, but it would not be true for every case. Let us see how. Let me open trainings.intershala.com. If we go to the source tab, here most of the resources are from trainings.intershala.com. But we also have resources from Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager. Similarly, you can check the resources that are loaded for Intershala's website on your own. So let us go back to our side panel which we were discussing. You can see that the resources here are nothing but our URL in a way. It starts with 127.0.0.1. Then we have a project folder inside which these files are present. Then we have a script.js file that is linked to our HTML file. And lastly, we have our HTML file. Note that the browser will not know if we have other files or folders present in our server until we link them with our HTML file. For example, if I create another folder, demo, inside the project folder and then refresh the web page, you can see that this folder will not be loaded by the browser because we have not linked it anywhere in our HTML file. Now, let us open our HTML and JavaScript files here. We can do it by double-clicking on the files and they will open in the center panel. We have already discussed this code in detail in the previous topic. So I will directly start with the execution of this code. Here, we are changing this paragraph element and its color upon click like this. Once again, I will remind you that it is a temporary change. The original code does not change because JavaScript is always executed once the web page has loaded. So if I refresh the browser, it will revert to the original state. So let us proceed to debug the JS code. Debugging in simplest terms means finding an error in the code, or we can make certain changes in the code to see and understand the flow and execution of the code. If you notice, here we have line numbers marked against each line of the code. If we click on any of these numbers, it will add a colored marker which we call a breakpoint. We will understand its significance in a moment. But first, notice that we can add as many breakpoints as we want. To remove a breakpoint, we again need to click on the number and the colored marker will disappear. Now, a breakpoint is added to pause the code execution at that point where we have added it. Like in this case, I have added breakpoints at line 3 and line 5. So, the code execution will pause at line 3 until it is resumed again, and then again the code execution will pause at line 5. So that was all about the significance of breakpoints. Let us now understand how the code execution takes place. That is, we will understand which line gets executed first when we have breakpoints in our code. In our JavaScript code, line number 1 will get executed first, and then line number 3 and line number 4, as there is nothing in line number 2. Line number 5 does not execute on its own. It gets executed when the element is clicked, which then calls the function, and then the line number 5 and 6 get executed. So again I repeat, when I loaded this web page and opened inspect element, the line number 1, 3 and 4 have already been executed because JavaScript gets executed the very moment the web page is loaded. The line number 5 and 6 have not been executed yet because we have not clicked on the paragraph element. The execution of line 5 and line 6 will only happen when I click the paragraph element. It does not matter if I click the element after 20 minutes or 2 hours. The execution will only happen when the element is clicked. So we can say that this event handler which we have on line 4 is like a watchman who is instructed to do something when something happens. Means here we have instructed him to change the element content and the color when we click on that particular element. Now let me click on the paragraph element and see what happens. So it gets paused because we have a breakpoint at line 5. Here we have two options. One is resume to unpause the execution, and the next is step over, which we will discuss later. So coming back, you can see that the execution has paused at line 5. The execution did not pause at line 3 because it got executed as the web page was loaded. Now at line 5, the code waits for my signal to resume. This is a simple JS code where we have used only one variable. But imagine if our code had hundreds of lines. It will show the values of all the variables. If I take my cursor over this L variable, it will show that this variable contains this thing. Obviously, it is an object and a much complicated one, and we are not concerned about all these values right now. But still, it will show all the properties it has. This L is a type node object, which we are already aware of, and if look at its inner HTML property that fetches the content part. Again, I will repeat. The L object has a lot of other properties which we have not discussed yet, and you should not worry about it at all at the moment. So this is the beauty of debugging. No matter how many variables we have in our code, if we take our cursor over these variables, we can see all the properties associated with each of them. Similarly, if I take the cursor over the document object, which is a predefined object, it will show the properties associated with it. And if I take the cursor over getElementById, it will show an F that denotes it as a function. So let us again come back to our two options, resume and step over. Now if I click on the step over, it means that the code will execute line by line, but the execution will not resume. Means it will execute line 5 and will pause at line 6, which we can see here. The content of the element has changed, but the color has not because the execution has paused at line 6. This option is very powerful and comes into play when we have big codes and we need to understand the code execution. So now, if I take the cursor over the L variable and see the inner HTML property, you will see the value has changed. Now if I step over again, line number 6 gets executed. As the code is completely executed, if I again click on the step over option, it might take us to some supported adjacent JavaScript file which might be called internally. As we don't need it, we will simply close this file. Now if I refresh the web page, the content will revert to black color with the previous content. So the line 1, 3 and 4 gets executed, but it then pauses at line 3 because we still have the breakpoints at the same position. Now if I click on step over, it will reach line 4, and if I again click on step over, it will directly reach line number 8. This is because line number 5 will only get executed when the element is clicked, which is not happening in our case. So JavaScript debugging is a very powerful tool, and it makes writing JavaScript easy as it helps to understand the code flow. It helps to pause the code at any moment, and we can check the execution line by line. Hope you had fun watching this video. Before you proceed to the next topic, make sure you debug the code on your own and see how the execution takes place. I'm sure you will enjoy doing it. Up next is a quiz. All the best. Bye-bye. After going through this video, you will be able to explain the need for Ajax. We would all agree that chocolate is tasty, and we would also agree that a muffin is tastier still. But when we combine both these items together, the end product is super delicious, that is chocolate muffin. In the same way, we learned JavaScript that is used to capture user actions. And on the other hand, we have also learned PHP that is used to communicate with the database. And now when we combine both these languages together, we get a powerful and beautiful technique called Ajax. Ajax stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. We will understand what it means in detail, but for now, let us first understand why we need Ajax in the first place. Suppose you're scrolling your Facebook newsfeed and you stumble across your friend's profile picture. You click on the like button and the color of the button changes to blue. Also, it increased the count of the likes by 1, and you can see who others have liked the profile picture. Can you think of how it might have been possible? It is simple. Facebook is capturing user action on the like button in the form of a JavaScript event. This is something similar to what we did in the previous topic. So, when a user clicks on the like button, it changes the color of the button to blue by changing some CSS properties. Also, it increases the like count and adds your name to it. So we can comfortably say that it is possible because of JavaScript. But you might ask that the changes we make on a web page using JavaScript are temporary, then how come my like stays there even when I close or refresh the browser? So when a user likes a picture, only changing the color of the like button and increasing the user count through JavaScript will not make the information stored for future reference. We need to store this information in the database. So how can we do that? If you recall, to store anything or fetch anything from the database, we use PHP. And the only way to execute PHP is by initiating an HTTP request for the corresponding PHP file. This means on clicking the like button, an HTTP request needs to be initiated for a PHP file that will update the database accordingly. We will need to send all the necessary information along with the HTTP request so that it can be used to generate the right database query. The information can be such as picture ID of the picture being liked and user ID of the person liking the picture. One way to think of it is to treat the like button as a form submit button. When we click on a submit button of a form, a new HTTP request gets initiated, generally for a PHP file with some data in it. But whenever a new HTTP request is initiated, we know that the browser is reloaded with the new HTTP response that comes along, and we say a new web page is loaded. If you remember, that's what had happened when we submitted the registration form. It loaded a new page saying registration successful, as that was the response we were sending. Here also, if we initiate a new HTTP request by clicking the like button, it would reload the browser with whatever response we send. We could either send a message saying successfully liked, and the entire web page would show this message, or it will send the newsfeed information again, but that would take the user back to the beginning of the feed. Imagine how you would feel every time you like a status or photo on Facebook and it reloads that newsfeed and takes you to the top of it. Irritating, right? So here comes the role of Ajax. That is, we will see how using Ajax we can ensure that the user continues to scroll the feed from where he is currently without reloading the page. And for that, you need to watch the next video. So stay tuned. After going through this video, you will be able to explain the significance of Ajax, initiate an HTTP request using Ajax. In the previous video, we left on an interesting note that how can we use Ajax so that whenever a user likes a photo or a status on Facebook, the web page does not reload. So let us understand the significance of AJAX. AJAX is a technique or way to initiate a new HTTP request through JavaScript without reloading a web page. This entire process happens in the background and the user does not know that a new HTTP request has been generated. So, to understand how AJAX works, we will revisit our request response diagram. So what happens when a user likes a photo? In the background, an HTTP request in the form of AJAX is initiated for a PHP file. The PHP code then interacts with the database and the database gets updated accordingly. Now the browser does not render the response, instead it invokes a JavaScript function through which we can do any change in the HTML as we may want to. Please make a note of this line as it is very important and we will again discuss this later in the video. Coming back, I was saying the browser does not render the response. Instead, it invokes a JavaScript function through which we can do any change in the HTML as we may want to. That is, the like button turns blue, the like count increases, and the user continues to scroll to see the next picture. So even if a user reloads the web page, the picture which the user liked earlier remains liked and the color of the like button remains blue, and so on, because the data has been already updated. To summarize, we can say that if on any user action, if we want to make any change to the loaded page, we can do that using JavaScript by changing the HTML elements. But in addition to this, if we wish to update the database or even get some information from it, we need to use AJAX to initiate an HTTP request in the background. So let us see how we can use AJAX to initiate an HTTP request with the help of this code. The code at first might look complicated, but don't worry. We will understand it line by line. In the first line, we have XML HTTP request, which is a class or a predefined function constructor in JavaScript. And using this function constructor, we are creating an object HTTP request. We can name this object anything we want, like AJAX request or anything. So this first line must be added in our code at the beginning, in which we have created a new object HTTP request. Now when we talk about a class, it has some properties and methods associated with it. So in the second line, we have one such property, onReadyStateChanged. Now using the object and the property, we are assigning a function named postAjax function. Note that here we are just assigning the function and not defining it. Also, we could have named the function anything we want. This function is defined later in our code. Coming back to our postAjax function, it has its own significance. If you recall, this function is that function which the browser will automatically invoke after the completion of the AJAX request. Now it is up to us if we want the function to do something or not. In our case, after clicking the like button, we want the color of the button to change. There are two ways to do it using this function. One way is to change the color of the button before the HTTP request is initiated, and the other way is to change the color after the request is completed. This is a complicated concept in itself, so let us not dive further into it. Just remember, inside this function, we define what we want to do once the AJAX request is completed. In the next line, the HTTP request has another method, open, in which we are passing two parameters. The first parameter is a type of HTTP request, that is a post request. The second parameter is a URL where we want to make the request. The next line is required if we are using a post request. If we would have been getting a GET request, then we could have ignored this line. Here we are calling another object setRequestHeader and passing two parameters, content type and application/x-www-form-URL encoded to it. Now let us come to the next line. In this line we have another function send. This is where we are actually initiating the HTTP request. Note that in the previous 4 lines, we were building the HTTP request object. If you notice, inside this function, we can pass the data we want. This is something we have already discussed in form submission in PHP and HTML modules. Now, this data has to be in a certain format, that is, key equal to some value. Here, we have the key as email and the value as aditya@intershala.com. Now, if we want to send one more data along with the HTTP request, we can do it very easily. After this, we need to use ampersand and enter the key value pair. Like I'm adding user_id as key and its corresponding value, which I have assumed as 4 for the illustration purpose. Similarly, if you want to add more data, you can do that by first using ampersand and then passing the key value pair. So to summarize, this piece of code is used to generate an HTTP request for this particular file. And when this HTTP request is initiated, the execution moves to the next line of code. This is the beauty of the AJAX, that whenever an HTTP request is completed, the browser will automatically call this function, that is post AJAX function, and at this moment, the function will be executed. Now let us understand more about this function which we have defined. As discussed earlier, this function gets called once the AJAX request is completed. We can do whatever we want to do inside this function. As you can see inside this function, we are using the same object HTTP request, and then we are using a property ready state. Now, with this property, there is some value associated. We won't discuss what values as it will make the syntax more complicated. But for understanding purposes, remember that with this property, there is some value associated. And similarly, we have some value associated with the class XML HTTP request also. So here, we are checking that the value of the ready state and the XML HTTP request are equal, and the function will only continue once the HTTP request is completed. Means we are ensuring that we get into this function and execute the following lines only after this HTTP request is completed. Now in the next line, we have another property and a value defined. This line of code has its own relevance. Let me explain it to you. Sometimes what can happen is that the HTTP request went and there is some PHP error which has a different value, that is 500. This means that the HTTP request is completed, but as a response you get an error 500. There can be other error codes like 400, means it cannot locate the PHP file. But let us not dive into this in more detail. So this line of code ensures that the HTTP request is successfully completed in the OK condition, that is, everything is right at the server side. And if there is any error, we get an error message such as something went wrong. Now once this entire code is executed, it returns some data. Now what is that data? We will look into that in the next video, so stay tuned. After going through this video, you will be able to initiate an HTTP request using AJAX. In the previous video, we discussed this code line by line to understand how an AJAX request is initiated. We also discussed that once this AJAX request is successfully executed, it returns us some data. Let us continue and learn about this data, that is how it is returned and more. So whenever the data is returned, it has to be in the form of an associative array. As you know, in an associative array, we pass key value pairs. Here, we have the key as name and its value is Aditya. And then we have another key as message and value as welcome to Intershala trainings. We are then encoding this associative array as JSON, means it will be converted into string. In PHP, we have a function JSON_encode to which we are passing the associative array. This function converts the associative array into a string so that we can use it with an echo statement to print and eventually pass the output as response. We can only pass a string to an echo statement. So the array needs to be converted into a string before we print it using the echo statement. So when the response comes back to the browser, since this was an AJAX request, the existing content of the web page doesn't get replaced by the new response. But in case it would have been a normal HTTP request and not an AJAX request, the new response would have replaced everything on the screen and you would see name equal to Aditya and message equal to welcome to Intershala trainings. But instead, since it was an AJAX request, when the response comes back, post AJAX function gets called. This is because while initiating the AJAX request, we have specified HTTP request dot on ready state change equal to post AJAX function. In fact, every time the state of the AJAX request changes, post AJAX function gets called automatically by the browser. In the function, we check if the AJAX request is completed or not, as we want to proceed only if it is completed. If the AJAX request is completed, we check if the request status is 200. That is, if the PHP code in the backend got successfully executed. There is a possibility that PHP code encounters some error. In that scenario, we know that the desired PHP code didn't get executed and the database might not be updated. So we take care of that scenario by printing a relevant message, which might not be needed always though. Only when the status of the request is 200, we can be sure that the PHP code gets executed successfully, the database is updated as desired, and we get the response sent by the PHP code. Using the response text property of the HTTP request object, we can get the response we have sent from the PHP as it is, which is in the string format. If we want to use the response as a string, we could have used it, but since it was converted from an array, we may want to convert the string back to a JavaScript object to access the data with ease. So we use a function json.parse to convert the response string into a JavaScript object response. Then using that object, we fetch the name and message as we have defined in the PHP array. So this is how we can initiate an AJAX request. I understand that this code is a lot complicated compared to the ones we have studied so far in this training. So please take your time to understand each line one by one to understand their relevance. So let us see this code in action. That is, we will debug this code to get a whole picture of how code execution happens and further solidify our understanding of this code. This is our HTML code which you are already aware of. Next, we have our JavaScript code. This is again something we have discussed in detail. Notice here, we have added the code which we discussed earlier that will initiate an AJAX request. And then we have our PHP code. You can download the codes from below the video. So here comes the interesting part, that is debugging. Here we have our output and below we have already opened our inspect element. We have already opened our HTML and JavaScript files. In our JavaScript file, let me put breakpoints first. I will add the first breakpoint at line 7, that is after the paragraph is clicked. And the next breakpoint I will add is somewhere in between this function, that is after the response has come from the server. Now as the page is already loaded, this means that line number 1, 3 and 5 are already executed. If I take the cursor over any of these objects or properties, we won't be able to see any value because we have not paused the execution. So let me add one more breakpoint at point 3 and then I will refresh the web page again. So our code execution has now paused. This we have already covered in the previous topic, so let me quickly step over and we will continue to discuss from line number 10. As mentioned earlier, HTTP request is an object, and if I take the cursor over this object, you can see some key value pairs. Let me again click on step over and this will take us to line 18. This means that by this time the HTTP request has been initiated, and also by this time some part of the JavaScript code has been executed. So AJAX executes in 3 layers. The first one is the JS code which initiates the AJAX request. The second layer is when the PHP code gets executed. And once the PHP code is executed, it comes back to JavaScript, that is inside this function, which is the layer 3. Now as we are currently in line 18 of our code, it means by this time the first 2 layers have been executed. And if we go to the networks tab now, this is how our HTTP request looks like. You can see the status as 200, means the files have been executed. And if we click on the header tab, we can see the data which went along with this request, that is aditya@intershala.com and ID equal to 4. There are many more headers which you do not need to worry about as they are beyond the scope of this training. Now as the status of the HTTP request is 200, if I click on the step over, the code execution will enter the if condition. Now if I hover the cursor over the object on line 20, we can see that the object is ready because we can see the properties. In these properties, you can see a property as response text, which contains the response as sent from the server. You can also see that the response text property holds a key value pair and not a string. Can you guess why here we have a key value pair and not a string? Pause the video and think for a moment. If you are unable to recall, we have already discussed the answer earlier in this video. So coming back, if I again click on resume, we will get back an alert. Aditya, welcome to Intershala trainings. This is how we can initiate and execute an AJAX request. Just remember that an AJAX request is executed in 3 layers. Before we end this video, I would strongly recommend you to debug the code on your own and understand the code execution. The concept of AJAX might seem difficult for a beginner level student, and the only way to make it simple is by practicing and understanding the logic behind every line of code. Hope you had fun watching this video. With this, we have come to the end of Module 6. Up next is a quiz, which will be followed by the assignment. So make sure that you complete the assignment, because in the module test and the final test of this training, you will get questions based on the assignment. All the best. Hi, congratulations on completing another milestone of this training, that is JavaScript. Now that you know how to write code using JavaScript and AJAX, it is time to implement the same in our PG Life web application. In this assignment, you will use JavaScript and AJAX in the login form of the web application. To help you get started with the assignment, I will explain and provide you the JavaScript and AJAX part of the sign-up form and the related files. And based on your understanding, you have to implement the same in the login form. Now this is the sign-up form which you have already coded earlier and made changes to it using PHP. Let me add some details into this form and submit it. Now this form takes us to another page where it says that the email already exists. This is not a desirable experience for a user, as the user has to again come back to the sign-up page and correct the details entered. So what we will do, we will use JavaScript and AJAX so that the error message is displayed on the same screen. Let me quickly show you how. You can see a pop-up that says the email is already registered. Now, let us move to the next step, that is to understand the corresponding JavaScript and AJAX code. Here, I have created a common.js file inside which I have written the JS and AJAX code of the sign-up form. The reason I have created a common file is because the same code will be included in multiple files. So, it is always recommended to create a common file in such cases. So let's get started with the JavaScript and AJAX code of the sign-up form. Now, obviously the code has something to do with the signup_modal code. We know that there was a form with ID equal to signup form. We will start with the first line. So basically all of our JavaScript code is inside an event handler. This means that when the window is properly loaded, this function gets executed. This function stretches from line 1 to line 43 of the code. Next, in our JavaScript code, we have var signup form equal to document.getElement by ID signup form. So it will fetch the form element. And on that element, we are listening to the event submit. This means when the form is submitted, this function will get executed. We won't go into the details of this function as you have already learned the syntax in detail in AJAX. In the next line, we are creating XML HTTP request object because on that object, only we will be passing on parameters to initiate an AJAX request. Then we are storing all the signup form data in the variable form_data by passing the form element here. Next, we have an XHR object, add event listener, load. This means when the AJAX request is successfully executed, we are calling this function signup_success. This function is defined later in the code and we will get into the details shortly. Also, notice that before this line, I have added a line comment that tells us what this line does. This is a good practice as it helps to quickly understand what the code is for. Now, if this XML HTTP request is not executed successfully, then this on_error function will be called. Again, this function is defined later and we will get into the details in some time. Next, we have defined the URL API/signup_submit.php, from where the HTTP request will be initiated. And using the next line, we are adding the form data to the request. The next part of the code corresponds to the image loading thing, or we also call it as GIF. If you had noticed, in header.php, we had this ID equal to loading, which is initially hidden. So coming back to our code, when the AJAX request is initiated, it will get element by ID loading and will make the element block, means it will make it visible. So the GIF will appear. The reason we are using this GIF is to indicate that the page is busy, it is loading. And this event.prevent default will help to stop the default from submission. Now let us come to the signup_success function. What we are doing here is hiding the loading GIF. This is because the page is not busy anymore and the loading is done. For response, we have to make a few changes in the signup_submit.php. Here, we have changed the way we are sending the response. Earlier, we were only echoing that something went wrong and we're exiting. But now, we have an associative array that has two key value pairs. And then, we are storing the associative array in the variable $response. And then we are passing this variable into a function JSON_encode. If you remember, the JSON_encode function converts the associative array into a string. Then we have echo, which means we are printing this in the browser. Similarly, we have made changes in the remaining code. Please read through the code line by line. Now, your task is to code the JavaScript and Ajax part of the login form in the common.js file, which you can download from the below video. Make sure to make the necessary changes in the login_submit.php as we have done in the submit.php file. All the best.